The emperor's first concern after a battle was for the wounded. He went over the terrain himself, helping them up, friend and foe alike, having bandaged those who had not yet been attended to and seeing that all, down to the last man, were transported in ambulances to the nearest hospitals. At Wagram, he requisitioned all the hacks in Vienna for this purpose. Every evening at bedtime, the surgeon Ivan told him of the visits he had made during the day to the town's hospitals or of the camp's ambulances. The first outcome of these faithful reports was having all the resources of the moment applied to the most urgent cases. Ivan had the emperor's entire confidence in this respect. The chief physician, Corvisar, only came with the army once. I remember having seen him at Schönbrunn at the time when the Battle of Wagram was ending. The chief surgeon, Boyer, only went on one or two campaigns. Ivan went on all of them. He could always be seen on horseback behind the emperor. He seemed attached to his shadow like Rustam. His usual assistants were the doctors Lemernier, Reeves, Juan, and Verliao. The emperor entrusted to the care of the wounded who could be treated separately. He followed the progress of their treatment with the keenest interest. Ivan was questioned on the slightest details, the nature of the wound, the hopes, the fears. He wanted to be told everything. With the help of this reliable information, he knew how to provide for many a secret need. He was able to blunt many sufferings this way. God alone knows all the good he did. At Vienna, after the Battle of Esslingen, the emperor had a bonus of 60 francs in crowns given to each wounded soldier, and from 150 to 1,500 francs to the officers according to their rank. For some days, the emperor's aides-de-camp were occupied only with that. For my part, says the Duke of Rovigo Savary in his memoirs, I spent 2 entire days making this distribution in 3 hospitals the emperor had ordered that we do all we could in order to console these unfortunate wounded. For example, we made these hospital visits in full dress uniform, accompanied by the war commissioner, the medical officers, and the director. The secretary of the hospital walked ahead, and the registry of invalids. He named them one by one, along with the regiment to which they belonged, and 12 crowns of 5 francs each were placed in the head of the invalid's bed. To supplement that, we were followed by 4 men of the emperor's livery who carried baskets filled with coins. This money was not taken from the army's funds. It was from the emperor's purse that provided it. From the hospital, the emperor followed his wounded as far as the roads. When the convoys of wounded could be evacuated at the rear, the officers who had the emperor's personal trust, Grand Marshal Duroc, General Drouot, General Corbineau, were in charge of going to the road where the carts were passing to give each wounded man another gold piece to take care of the final needs on his journey. The treasurer Pyrrhus, who was Monsieur de la Bouillerie's delegate for the emperor's household expenses in the army, saw all the gold he had spent on these distributions. So many books speak of Napoleon's battles that it seemed to me important to interject into the bloody pages of this great story some details of charity and kindness. Thus, I ask permission to exhaust what I have left of incomplete memories of this sort. I can cite 6,000 francs that I was in charge of taking to General Bisson, who remained wounded at Lumbach. I find in my notes a like sum of 6,000 francs sent by Napoleon to an artillery major who had just undergone an amputation. I recall another 7,000 francs he had distributed at Ingolstadt among the Bavarian wounded. At Plitvice, after the Berencina, Meneval counted in front of me 6,000 francs meant to provide General Zionchek, who had just undergone the amputation of his leg at the thigh, with the means of reaching Warsaw, etc., etc. All these payments had been made from the emperor's private purse, and as I have already stated, it was what he ascribed to his accounts as service d'amis. Service to friends. Here are payments chargeable to another fund. May I be forgiven. I would not know how to end this chapter on war travels without saying everything that can make the unusual nature of the conqueror better appreciated. Alexander of Macedonia had strewn everywhere he went bits and bridles of a larger size than normal, so that posterity would believe he and his men were exceptional because they used such large horses. What Napoleon strewed on his path will perhaps better commend his memory. It was as if his travel purse were pierced. With the help of the numerous coins which fell from it, we can follow the route of his itinerary as needed. I mention these last traces that I choose at random in Poland, Germany, Spain, and even during the marches of the campaign of France. This is a long list of money he gave out. Chapter 25. The work of the cabinet. Continuation of war travels. In the interval from one military operation to another, when the Imperial Division stopped somewhere, the cabinet reestablished itself at once and took up again its routine and work habits. We pulled from the coaches leather bags containing portfolios, papers, records, and supplies. We also pulled out what the emperor called his campaign library. It was a collection of small volumes of history and literature, particularly concerning the country where we were. The boxes which held these books were of mahogany with handles which made them easy to move. We pulled them out of their leather wrapping and arranged them open on tables, planks, or chairs along the walls of the room where the emperor worked, and these improvised shelves did much to improve the furnishing of our military cabinet. I have said elsewhere that it was a pleasant pastime for the emperor to see, too, the composition and perfecting of his travel library. When the imperial retinue found itself in a large city or in a residence where meetings were possible, the emperor began to hold administrative councils on the army's affairs, similar to those in Paris, where he studied in depth so single-mindedly and successfully the needs and resources of the general administration of the empire. The large headquarters at Schönbrunn near Vienna, those at Berlin, Poznan, Warsaw, Finkenstein near Thorn, Chamartin near Madrid, Vilna, Moscow, and the Marcolini House in Dresden have long remained in the memory of army administrators for the importance and the number of tasks which were imposed on them during these hard-working stays. The Intendant General of the Army and the General Paymaster, the Administrator of the area we occupied, the Chief Directors for these services, bread supplies, meat supplies, transport, hospitals, clothing, military equipment, etc. The inspectors for pay reviews, the generals of engineering for equipment stores, the engineering offices for the reparation of army fortresses, bridges, and roads, or for the preparation for sieges, the council of state auditor assigned to the civil administration of the province, and sometimes even the officials of the region whom it was necessary to hear in the interest of their citizens. These were the various officers or functionaries that the emperor liked to gather to deliberate in council. Let us name the principals. First of all, Count de Roux in Paris, whether he was steward of the emperor's household or secretary of state in the army, the emperor saw him primarily as his first military intendant. After Count de Roux came General Mathieu de Ma, Baron de la Bouillerie, the officials Denier the Elder, Dor, Marchand, Joinville, Dufour, the Councillor of State Boursier, General of the Remount Service, General La Riboisiere, Artillery Inspector, etc. When we've gone round the table in this manner, we find again next to the Emperor his inseparable scribe, the Secretary of State. Messieurs, the Emperor would say in these meetings, it is not to convince you of my opinion, but to have yours, that I have called you. Tell me your views. I will then see if what you propose to me is better than what I think. There were times when the emperor himself turned war commissioner. Then all his staff had to do likewise. We, others in the cabinet, left our dispatches to draw up reports of stores. And during these digressions, it served me well to have spent part of my youth in a director's offices. General Duroc was a great help to the emperor in all these duties. He used everyone up to his Minister of Foreign Relations. I have seen Monsieur de Talleyrand in Warsaw pursue correspondence about supplies while the emperor fought at Eylau. And when we were in Moscow, it was the Duke of Bassano Marais at Vilna whom the emperor asked to supervise the establishment of his reserve stores. Never have greater authority and more diligent consistency been used to track down waste, to right disorder, to console and rescue victims. But war is a bottomless abyss. Many of Napoleon's plans had been swallowed up in it. We see what a huge task he set for the free time in his headquarters. The empire's concerns suffered not at all. This way, the mind relaxes in turning from one occupation to another, and Napoleon made admirable use of this method of refreshing himself. No matter how far he was from Paris, every day he received a special messenger from there and sent one there. A special messenger is a means of communication still more rapid than that of dispatch couriers. A courier stops from time to time to eat and drink, and on a long trip, even to sleep. The special messenger neither drank, ate, nor slept, and always sped. The special messenger was very simply a leather case locked on which there was a copper plaque with these words, "The Emperor's Dispatches." It was passed from hand to hand, from post to post, from country to country, and every French or foreign coachman whose possession it came into made it a point of honor to cover the distance with the greatest possible speed. The key was at the two extremities in Paris in the hands of Monsieur de Lavalette, Director General of the Post, and in the imperial quarter in those of the Emperor's secretary. When the special messenger arrived at a moment when the secretary wasn't there, the emperor had the belly of the case slit open in order to pull out his dispatches without further delay, and in this event, woe to any personal letters that had been slipped among his. He did not always deny himself the pleasure of reading them. In later days, to avoid this small inconvenience of disemboweling the special messenger, it was decided to entrust a key to it to the Duke of Vicenza, Cavalcancourt, whose office of Grand Equerry kept him the most often near the emperor at the times when the secretary could not be there. When they were on the road on horseback or in a coach, another key was given to the Duke of Bassano Marais to facilitate the sending of his dispatches. It was rare that the emperor turned his attention away from the regularity of his special messenger service, but it did happen. During certain crises in battle, I have seen him let several of them in a row pile up without responding to them and even without reading them. But in that case, he ordered his secretary to open them and see if there was anything urgent. In this way, any information that it was important for him to receive at once did not escape him. The rest had to wait. The battle will answer, the emperor would say. In truth, a battle, and above all a victory, cleared up many questions and ended many matters. Everything that had accumulated in recent days quickly went to the answered pile, and the desk was clear. Aside from the special messengers, letters in the army went by mail coach. Additionally, there was regular communication with Paris through an auditor of the Council of State, whom the Arch-Chancellor sent every week to take to the Emperor the work of the ministers and the council. This is why there are scarcely any major headquarters whose names are not found in the collection of decrees of the empire. The same auditor was then to take back the work he had brought, but most managed to see their zealousness employed temporarily in some provincial supply corps or some army administrative duties. From the moment of their arrival until the moment they received a destination, these young people stayed near the Secretary of State, Following him on marches, eating at his mess, they gathered around the minister like a group of aides de camp. It was considered good for these young officials to become accustomed to the smell of powder, to grow familiar with the improvisations of camp life, and to offer to the miseries of militarily occupied countries the support of a sensitivity that had not yet been blunted. I do not know, however, if this stay of the auditors in the army did not have more unpleasant consequences than benefits when they returned to the salons of Paris. Perhaps war should not be seen up close by too many people who are not career soldiers. The smell of a drinking orgy is repugnant to those who are not taking part in it. After finding themselves at the rear of a battlefield, the young auditors of the council could only recall horror and disgust, and it seems to me that their accounts were not of a sort to popularize war. Of all the duties that the cabinet had to attend to on campaigns, those that interested us the most were the preliminary writing and expedition of the bulletins. For whom were the bulletins of the great army not particularly interesting then? For those who would read them. May one of those who wrote them be permitted to speak of them. The duty of an army commander is to make a precise and almost daily report of the events of war to his government. The emperor, having no one above him to answer to, addressed his to the public. Bulletins replaced dispatches. It was Napoleon himself who took the trouble of keeping Paris and the rest of Europe up to date about what he was doing with the great army. It is known that the great army was the one that the emperor commanded personally. Who better than he could appreciate the reports of his many lieutenants assigned to each isolated fact, its place in the whole, and assess the importance and the appropriateness of this publicity? Finally, who better than he could give to each the praise or blame that he deserved? The interval that the emperor let elapse between one bulletin and another was not fixed, but as soon as an important event had occurred, he thought of sending a new one. Come, he would say, we must write a bulletin. Where did we leave off? Then we hurried to show him the last bulletin. We gave him at the same time a current folder which contained the various reports that could serve him as material. He found on the cover an early summary of the facts that we were in the habit of preparing for him and whose entire value for the emperor lay in the lists of dates and place names. After having glanced over this framework, he began to dictate. The events which surrounded us like a confusing fog then appeared out of the chaos. Everything cleared up in the dictation, whose rapid flow we hurried to take down. Our loose sheets, written as if beaten out on a drum, were at once transmitted to the Secretary of State, who sent them to the Moniteur. From there, these pages will pass into history. Napoleon's war bulletins were written for Paris and even for all Europe. As a result, their effect was calculated according to the laws of political perspective. He said what could be said in them. He forbore to speak only of what it would have been dangerous to make known too soon, what could have alerted our enemies or caused premature worry to our friends. It is necessary today to admit that we willingly diminished the number of our dead and wounded and allowed ourselves to exaggerate a bit of those of the enemy. The enemy did the same to us. In addition, in these seeming discrepancies which petty minds always prided themselves on not being fooled by, there was a basis of real truth that became apparent later. Nothing speaks louder than the blood and debris that combat leaves in its wake. First, only the suffering is felt. Only the loss is seen. It is exaggerated, but experience knows that it must diminish. As for the enemy's losses, what can be judged at first glance? Perhaps not even a quarter of them are seen. It requires nothing less than several days of sustained pursuit to bring to light what an earlier retreat was able to hide. But there are probabilities that in these matters offer clearer vision than the eyes. This second sight is that of the superior man, and that which makes the adjustment that the public takes at first for a voluntary error. In general, we were perhaps in a worse position in the army than elsewhere to appreciate the historic merit of the bulletins. Nothing is more inaccurate or more incoherent than the account of a great battle made by a man who has only seen a piece of it. He considers himself knowledgeable in speaking about it because he was there, and involuntarily he confuses everything because of necessity. He relates everything to his army corps, his division, his battalion, his wagon, himself. How could such judges, at such a remove from the emperor's point of view, see themselves in his bulletin? We have said that the bulletins contain only the truth of the initial moment, when they were read in the army, which could only be done in newspapers brought back from Paris. 2 or 3 weeks had gone by since the event. During this interval, some assertions of detail had been contradicted. Others, which had been presented as false, had the time to prove themselves true. Then the critics could well seize on these errors. They reveled in them. They reveled in many other trivialities. When in the flurry of dictation one man's name had been written for another, some figure had been reversed, some village had appeared on the map under the name of a neighboring village, the harm was not serious for the faraway public the bulletin was addressed to, especially if, in spite of these errors, the account remained true overall and in spirit, and gave to the action all the salient points that distinguished it. But the less important these mistakes were, the more they were to the taste of the fault-finders. They jumped on them. And as they were witty, because wit never lacks in French military staff, the comments were ceaseless. It was then that the famous words were spoken. As false as a bulletin, as much as one remark can be the basis of satire, it was successful. Those who live on stock phrases in Paris ate it up, but the humor quickly ran out, and the testimony of the enemy himself intervened. It is now generally recognized that in spite of a few pencil strokes lost or jotted too quickly, these beautiful sketches are above all distinguished by their initial accuracy, and certainly the chapters of Quintus Curtius and the commentaries of Caesar could not have been written in better faith. In the shallow attacks on the veracity of the bulletins, we must not ignore the resentment of many people whose pride was wounded because they weren't named in them. But we must above all take into account our unfortunate national failing of having no greater enemies to our success and our glory than ourselves. Could not this self-criticism be a subtle aspect of our French pride? We offer to our enemies an extreme degree of generosity beyond all reciprocity, without parallel, which does honor to us alone. And we seem to take more pleasure in the scrupulousness of this sort of superiority than any other. The first copy of a bulletin arriving in Paris was always for the Empress. The Emperor wanted her to always be the first informed. Normally, he never sent a special messenger without jotting a line for his wife. These he did not dictate but wrote himself, and through lack of practice it was difficult for him to write legibly. "Give me a little sheet of nice paper," he would say to us. "Give me a good pen. After all, my good Louise must be able to read me." And he would write. Then he gave us back the sheet folded in two, saying, "To the Empress." And when he was in a good mood, he added, "To the woman of my dreams, the queen of my heart." The secretary would have an envelope all ready for the Emperor's note. He sealed it at once and wrote as addressed, "Letter from the Emperor to the Empress." On its arrival, the Director General of the Post sent it himself by special delivery to its destination. When the Emperor, in a hurry to mount his horse, could not write to the Empress himself, he wanted the special messenger to carry a line, at least, written indirectly by him. It was understood between the Empress orders, and the emperor, that in this case the secretary, would write. Meneval and I were diligent in carrying out this duty, and no messenger arrived in Paris without the emperor's having some news of the emperor. The emperor did not always have time to sign. It often happened that he was on horseback without being able to wait for all that he had just dictated to be sent. If there were a too urgent letter that might suffer from this, he ordered us to send it without a signature. In this case, we sent the letter off, noting at the bottom that it was by his order we sent it thus, and we signed. I believe I have used up all the various additional items that circumstances of travel and war campaigns could provide to complete my account of Napoleon's life in his cabinet. Part 4. Napoleon in his person, his character, and his distinctive opinions. Chapter 26. Advantages of original memoirs. A look at some authors who have already spoken of Napoleon's person. It was difficult to distract Alexander from whatever he wished to do because fate bowed to him in all his undertakings, made him whole and firm in his opinions, and the vastness of his courage made him persist, invisible in all things once he had begun them. Plutarch, Life of Alexander. We have just traced the daily circle in which Napoleon moved at the Tuileries, in the country, on journeys, and in the army. If we have been fortunate enough to be read, you have been able to follow it with us step by step, but this is not nearly enough. The imagination, to better gain an idea of how great a historical figure, needs to be shown him in his human form. We want to know the person. Lacking an actual likeness, we would make an imaginary one. Let us do this then in giving Napoleon's portrait, a necessary complement to a book where we are much less concerned with the emperor than with the man. We like to hear those who say, "I have seen." Historical proceedings are like all others. They are known through witnesses. Would you request the portrait of an absent one from a painter who never knew him? What likeness could he produce? Can we paint a reflection of others' memories? The most skilled artist would torment himself in vain, searching for the features described to him. He would never capture the whole, however he heaped his canvas with all the colors asked of him. He would never know the exact proportions required. If by chance he caught a gleam of truth, a little bit of truth makes for the common man's error. That is exactly how he would be worst misled. And the face, who would inspire it to the painter? Where would he find it? If you find a painter who knew the original well, the impossibilities vanish. Technical perfection is no longer even necessary. It certainly spoils nothing, but it does not constitute a likeness. The painter needs only himself. He takes up the brushes with assurance. He remembers. Historical controversy multiplies conjectures and probabilities in vain. We never know for certain if it is the truth that it brings to life. When it plays over ancient centuries, at least it is learned. It has let the dregs of time settle and gives off a fragrance of antiquity that has a certain merit. But it is not the same for contemporary history. With probabilities and conjectures, the best known facts would be buried. We have everyday portraits of Napoleon that clever people who never went near him insist on giving us. Error and truth surround them. The difficulty in distinguishing between them is great. It is like seeing men plunged into the darkness of a cave, moving forward by putting down a foot as they can, sometimes correctly, sometimes mistakenly, tending too far to the left or right, striking out too strongly or too tentatively, this way and that, and almost always in the wrong direction. Some are clumsy apologists, others unjust critics. Must we not admire, said Cardinal de Retz, the confidence of these popular historians who believe they do wrong if they leave a single event in their works without delving into every motive that they propose and then almost always drop? They have not even gone into the antechamber, and they pride themselves on knowing everything that goes on in the cabinet. Moreover, they suppose they have penetrated all the innermost recesses of the hearts of those who have taken part in these matters. These worthy people, replied the great Conde, take us, you and me, as being how they would have been if they were in our shoes. Original memoirs have another attraction. The position in which their authors find themselves is already sufficient to give these compositions a local color that expresses itself in various shades. Each author has his own territory, and it is always more valuable to meet him there. How could one refuse to listen to Napoleon's doctors who speak of his physical constitution and his illnesses? Do not the chamber valet and the Red Lady excite a lively curiosity when they take to showing their master and mistress in the casual state of the bedroom? The old school friend and the former secretary, despite their ingratitude, are still intriguing in the material that Monsieur de Bourrienne provided for the memoirs bearing his name. Each time that the aide-de-camp and minister write under the inspiration of their old recollections in the Duke of Rovigo Savary's memoirs, their story acquires a vast superiority over the posthumous mishmashes that these volumes are stuffed with. Even the smallest anecdotes of the dining room are enjoyable under the lazy but pleasing pen of the former palace prefect, Monsieur de Bassett. As for the Napoleon of audiences and informal conversation, he comes to life in some pages that his chaplain, Monsieur de Pratt, has scattered throughout various brochures, and which alone could merit an entire book.